Okay, this is a video about politics, and here's a question. Should Ireland, long a province, be a nation once again? Whatever happened to that dream? It did flicker to life for a few decades, but those sunny days are now a distant memory because it's been snuffed out with ruthless Euro efficiency, and today the President of Ireland is effectively an unelected Belgian. This is because Ireland gave up its currency and joined the single European currency, which saddled the country with an artificially low interest rate, creating a massive bubble that has now burst spectacularly. And because banks are more important than people, the government is bailing them out with massive amounts of the people's money borrowed at interest rates guaranteed to keep the next generation in poverty. Understandably, people aren't very happy about this. So a couple of months ago, they held an election in Ireland where they voted for a new future, which, as it turns out, is identical to the old future. Just because they called it an election doesn't mean it had anything to do with democratic self-determination. Ireland is a member of the European Union, where democracy means you can vote for whatever you like as long as it's more of the same. So the Irish people were given a straight choice between more of the same and more of the same. But they couldn't make up their minds, so they've got a coalition of more of the same. The European Union is very popular with politicians because it's very good to politicians. It was created for their benefit. It's not so good to voters because it denies them a voice, another reason it's popular with politicians. These days, we in Europe no longer make most of our own laws. We have them handed down to us by people we haven't elected and can't remove. The people we do elect are powerless to change anything, even if they wanted to, and most of them don't want to because they've got their snouts in the trough of a corrupt organisation whose accounts haven't been signed off for the last 16 years. And we, the people that is, haven't consented to any of this. We've had it steadily imposed upon us through duplicity and coercion. Because today in Europe, the grand project, political union, is more important than the people, and that's the bottom line. Nothing must ever be allowed to disrupt the project, especially not democracy. Indeed, if there's one thing a Euro politician despises and fears more than anything, it's the democratic will of the people. And this is because many of those who run Europe today were politicised by 60s pseudo-Marxist utopianism, which they're still determined to impose on the people for their own good, regardless of what the people might want. They believe in centralised state control, society as a project, their project. It's the mentality that ran the old Soviet Union, and it's the mentality that has driven the European Union forward against the wishes of the European people, imposing a constitution on the whole of Europe that hardly anyone was allowed to vote for, and imposing a single currency on the whole of Europe that's now falling apart at the seams. But they won't abandon it because they consider it a vital step on the road to full political union and the abolition of all European nation states under a central socialist dictatorship. So you can just imagine how inconvenient democracy is to this mentality, when people have consistently shown they can't be trusted to vote the way they're told. But what can they do? They can't just abolish democracy, because, well, that might raise a few eyebrows, even in sleepy old Europe. So instead they practice a kind of soft totalitarianism dressed up in the language of consensus that effectively neutralises democracy. Yes, you can vote if you want to, but if you vote the wrong way, you'll have to do it again till you get it right, or your vote will be ignored. For your own good. Ireland was the only country in Europe that was allowed to hold a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty, which establishes the unwanted constitution for the whole of Europe. And that was only because the Irish constitution insisted on a referendum and their politicians couldn't weasel out of it the way they did everywhere else, including Britain. So we all watched the Irish referendum with great interest because our future depended on the outcome. And when the Irish people voted against the Lisbon Treaty, we applauded them for it and thanked our lucky stars for Irish democracy. So what happened? Their vote was ignored and they were forced by their own politicians to vote again. The second time, they were bullied into voting in favour by a relentless, unanimous and heavily financed campaign of deliberate fear-mongering and lies by those same politicians, business leaders and the media, all desperate to sign away their country to all things Euro. And now, just look at Ireland, barely a province, let alone a nation, with massive unemployment and people once again leaving in droves. It's as if the last 100 years never happened. The Irish people have been conned into giving away their country. Their sovereignty has been swindled from them, and those responsible should be in jail. Once again, they're finding out in Ireland the hard way that when other people control your destiny, you cease to matter. The Euro project is all that matters to the Euro fanatics, and if a few million people are reduced to poverty, that's a price worth paying for ever closer union and ever more control. Thanks to the European Union, Ireland doesn't make its own laws or control its own borders. That's already a given. But now it doesn't even run its own economy. The country's been stripped and left shivering in its underwear. Yet the unelected president of the European Commission, Mr. Barroso, unlike most of them, not a closet Marxist, but a closet Maoist, I guess that's what they mean by diversity, he had the nerve to blame the Irish for their own misfortune, which is like slapping somebody with their own hand. It's what we call taking the piss. But then Mr. Barroso can afford to be so glibly dismissive. He's paid more than the American president, more than the British Prime Minister, so he's not feeling the squeeze, and he can't be removed by popular vote, so he doesn't have to give a damn. If ever a man was asking for a political kick in the crotch, it's this guy. And Ireland could be just the country to give it to him, because he and his cronies are now terrified that Ireland might just say, enough is enough, and withdraw from the single currency, and set an example to other countries that could bring their whole corrupt artificial house of cards crashing down, that Ireland could decide to stand on its own feet again, to restore the punt, to default on these oppressive, predatory loans, and tell the bankers and the Eurocrats to shove their extortionate interest rates right up their Lisbon Treaty. You know, like a nation once again. But for that to happen, Ireland, you'll have to elect a leader, and not just another bloody politician. Good luck with that. Peace.